A quick thank you to our sponsors for making this podcast possible. They keep this show free to listen to. Hi, I'm Michelle, a mother of 2 teens. 13 years ago, I traded in punishments and rewards for connection. Now I prioritize relationship over behaviors, utilize play as a parenting tool, and set limits with empathy instead of consequences. Each week, I share my journey and interview clients, experts, and followers. Thanks for joining me on the Peace and Parenting podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Peace and Parenting podcast. I'm Michelle, and I have lovely guests today, Dr. Joel Warsh, and he has a new book, and he is a doctor, and he is deeply invested in the lives and health of kids. And so welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, going back about me a little bit. So I'm an integrative pediatrician. So what that means, I guess, to me is, so I did the regular training. I trained at a great allopathic Western program, Children's Hospital Los Angeles, I guess right around the corner from both of us. And I got a little bit frustrated as I went through training with all of the medications for everything and super short visits and really focusing on treatment all the time. And so that's what got me really interested in integrative medicine and integrative parenting. I'm not against Western medicine at all. I just think that there's a time and a place. And I feel like we're way too quick to use a medication these days in modern medicine. There are a lot of alternative practices that are used all over the world. And there are so many other options out there. And so I try to bring the best of both worlds together. And similarly, I feel like there's just so much division out there when it comes to parenting. And it's like there's one right way to do everything and it's got to be this way. And so it has made me really frustrated over the last few years. And that's what led me to start doing more on social media, because I was trying to get this stuff out in my office, but it's still just a small group of people. And it has seemed like it really has resonated with people. And that's why I think Instagram, Dr. Joel Gator, has grown pretty quickly. And then I was like, okay, well, the next step, I guess, is to write a book, right? That's what everyone was saying. So I really wanted to focus on parenting and trying to discuss all the different options out there within what's reasonable and safe, bringing the science and the experience I have as a pediatrician, but also kind of balancing the best of both worlds. And I wanted to focus on the first 3 years. So the book's called Parenting at Your Child's Pace. And it's really a focus on 2 things. Number one, de-stressing parents. I feel like parents are more stressed than ever, even though we do have more access to information. So that can be more stressful, but there's a lot of things that are actually a lot less stressful really than they used to be, but doesn't seem like that as a parent. And then number 2, the health aspect to parenting and in childhood. I really feel like we're so focused on treatment. We're not focused on prevention yet. Chronic disease rates are skyrocketing. Like 50% of kids now have a chronic disease. And most parenting books are written by therapists and moms and not really doctors anymore. Doctors more seem to write books that are more clinically relevant, like how do you treat a cough and those kind of things, which are important too. And therapists write great books. I mean, there are a lot of fantastic ones out there, but it's just a different perspective than you get. And so I try to bring those 2 worlds together.
Amazing. Okay. I like that. I want to dig in. As you were talking, I just had this light bulb moment. I just was trying to think I think what stressed me out mostly in the first 3 years, and when I would go to the doctor, what stressed me out was this idea that my child had to fit on a chart and had to be within these, these norms. And if they weren't, I had to feed them more. I had, in particular, what I was talking about, my daughter was really low weight, but she's just a tiny person. She's 18 now and she weighs 89 pounds and she's 5'1". So she's just a little person, and she always was very low on the growth chart. And I always felt so scared and like I was doing something wrong and something was wrong with her and that we had to fix it and that, I had to give her protein shakes and all these things. And I kept thinking, but she's just who she is. She's just now I know I should have just taken a deep breath and said, she doesn't fit on the chart. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. And it definitely resonates really well with the portion of the book that we talk about, developmental milestones, right? Because it's such a big thing that you do when you go to the pediatrician. And I feel like most people don't totally understand them. And the reality is having milestones and comparing to other kids in general can be helpful to kind of put things into perspective of where you fall. But just because you're higher or lower in no way means that there's a problem. Some people are big and some people are small, and that can be perfectly normal for you. So the most help I think that a chart is for the doctor is to kind of look and compare yourself against yourself and then see where things are. Because if you start at the 90th percentile and then all of a sudden you're at the first percentile, a couple months later, that points to like, okay, well, what's going on? Like, is there something else going on? But just because you're at the first percentile doesn't mean that there's a problem. It could be something that you should be aware of, but you just might be smaller. And so as an integrative minded practitioner, I try to remind parents, to think about all of the things that a doctor might be thinking about. Like, do they have issues in other areas, like their motor skills? Are they developing normally on all the other areas that we're looking for? Do they have any dysmorphic features where you'd be worried about some genetic condition? Do they have speech delays? Do they get sick all the time? Or is everything else normal and they're just a little bit smaller? Okay, so they're just smaller. No big deal.
Yeah, exactly. I think it, like you were saying, like there's so much pressure on us parents and we'll get into this idea. I want to hear more about your book, but this idea of like be the perfect parent and doing everything perfectly and doing everything right and having our kids do everything right. And that there's all this external like societal pressure that we have to grow up these like superhumans that they can't just be like people, just normal, regular people. They've got to go to Carnegie Mellon. They've got to play the piano. They've got to, do all these things. And that creates so much pressure for us parents. I'm just wondering, how does your book, do you talk about that in your book?
Yeah. Well, I think the first concept that has been really helpful is kind of that good enough parenting, the mentality of the way that I think about it is like, what is a perfect parent? Like, what does it even mean? I think you want to be that, and everybody wants to strive for that. And that's great. I mean, you want to be the best parent that you can be. You want to give your kids the best opportunities that you can to make them the most resilient. But what does that mean? I think you have to really sit down and think about that, because more isn't necessarily better. And we're definitely learning that. I mean, I think that we have seen that kids are more stressed than ever. Mental health issues are worse than they've ever been. Kids are overworked. They're overscheduled. And so just because you're doing more isn't necessarily better. So I think it's finding that balance. And that to me is the crux of like integrative parenting. It's finding that balance and trying to take in the information and do what's best for you. Because when you mention about making those choices as a parent and being stressed with all this information, it's like, well, there is so much out there. And then, well, what is the right thing to do? You get 10 different opinions. Every one of them is the exact right way. There's only one way to do this. And if you don't do it, your kid is not going to Carnegie Mellon, and there's no way they're getting into Harvard. And, and you're like, but it's just feeding them and they're just 6 months old. Like it doesn't really matter. But it just all seems so important at the time. And I feel like that is because we're in a Google, society. We're in a society of information, and most parents forget that we're also in a very litigious society. And so every sort of article is going to give you the worst case scenario. They're going to kind of lay it out for you, but not everything is the worst case scenario. And also we're in a world where people want to make money. And so they have their way and they want to sell you their product, and it's the only right way. And this is the way to sleep train. And if you do this, then that's the right way. And if you don't do it, then this is the wrong way, or you should never sleep train because you're going to ruin your kids. And the reality is somewhere in the middle, and it's going to be whatever works for you. And that is what I try to dive into, like kind of what is the research? Because some things do have some pretty good research that can be helpful, but almost every topic when it comes to parenting is not cut and dry. There's not one way to do it. There are many ways to do it.
I like to think too, like what feels good in your soul and your heart. Like if it doesn't feel good in your soul and your heart to do a thing to your child, whatever it is, or not do a thing or insist on a thing or whatever it is, then you have to listen to that, because you're your kid's best, you're their biggest cheerleader, you're their biggest supporter, and also them best. And so if it doesn't feel right to do anything, we have to listen to that. That's so important.
Right. One great example of kind of what we're talking about, I think, is starting food for babies, right? There's this baby-led weaning movement, and then there's purees. They're kind of the two big discussion areas these days. And the people that are do baby-led weaning are like very gung-ho, like you got to do it this way. You're not going to have good development of their mouth. They're going to be overweight or obese. You're doing everything wrong. This is the way it has to be. But then there are all these parents that read that or see that on social media, Instagram, and then they're super freaked out because they're like, I don't want my kid to choke, and I'm not comfortable with this, and now I'm super stressed every time they're eating. And they come to me in the office and they're like, I'm really scared. Like I read about this baby-led weaning, but I don't want to do it. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like you could do both. You could do purees. You could do baby-led weaning if you're comfortable doing it. But if you're going to be stressed out at every single meal, then that's going to be way worse on your baby. And like, remember, there are kids in the world that don't have food. So baby-led weaning versus purees, it does not matter. It like, really doesn't.
Yeah.
And we have to remember where to be stressed out. Like, just do them both, pick whichever you like, and then go with that.
I like that. Like, we have to remember where to be stressed out, because most of the things that we stress about, especially us here in the United States, are not the things that necessarily that like matter so much. We're hitting pause for a moment to thank our sponsors. These brands make sure you can listen to this podcast for free. This episode is sponsored by ByHeart. ByHeart features a patent protein blend that gets closest to breast milk. Their formula includes the most abundant protein, alpha-lac, found in breast milk, as well as lactoferrin, the number one protein found in colostrum. ByHeart is an easy-to-digest formula which includes prebiotics and an 80-20 whey to casein ratio like in early breast milk, making it great for a newborn's digestive system. ByHeart is the only U.S.-made infant formula made with certified clean ingredients, including organic, grass-fed, whole milk, not skim. What it doesn't have is soy, corn syrup, GMOs, or palm oil. Curious about ByHeart? Redeem your welcome offer at byheart.com/podcast. Use code PEACE for a limited time. Additional terms and conditions apply. My book, Unpunished, is finally here. It is my journey into connected parenting, the idea of perfection and how it nearly took me down as a mom. I give you my best thinking around how to be a connected parent and the insights that I've discovered over the last 12 years of this incredible journey. I'm giving my book away for free, plus shipping and handling. So go to unpunished.com and get yours today. We're shipping domestically and we're also shipping internationally. Let's dive back in. People like to ask me questions like, well, how many hours of screen time is how much should I give my kid for screen time if they're 12? I'm like, that's not the question you should be asking.
Right.
You have to decide that. That's your family and what's right for you. You're a thinking human being. You know what's too much or what's not enough. The idea is like, are you balancing it? And is it, does it seem right and fair and wrong? I'm not going to tell you put your kid to bed at 7 o'clock at night and they have to have the routine and they have to have this. Are you leading with your heart? Are you coming with connection? Are you diving into a relationship with your child? And is that what's most important? Or are you getting stuck in the nuance of like all these little how many activities? Like we get stuck in these things, I think, because I don't know why. I think we're just so worried we're going to do the wrong thing because there's too much information.
I agree. And we are born innately to do this. People have been parenting for a long time, right? And we have a lot more information than we ever had. And that is a good thing. I mean, it is good to be able to look up things, but you have to put that into perspective. And as a pediatrician, and I think what does help a lot of parents, even in my practice, is just to remind people that, when I get a text from a parent or when I get a question from a parent or an email, like 99.9% of the time, it's fine. Like a pediatrician's job mostly is to be like, yep, that's fine. That's fine. It's normal. It's okay. And yes, of course, every once in a while, it's not. And there's something that we have to send you to the hospital for or whatever. That's what we're trained to do, right? But the vast, vast, vast majority of the time, it is normal. So you can take a deep breath knowing that it is probably normal. It's probably okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't get checked if you're worried. But we're worried so much and so often these days, and parents are so overstressed about things that they wouldn't have asked a doctor about in the past. I mean, I think we had more connection, more community. Family was closer by for a lot of people, so they could just ask, mom or grandma these questions, which they don't have anymore. And so they go to the internet about the, gas.
Don't do that.
It spirals, right? It spirals from like my 1 month old is gassy, which every baby's gassy. That's normal.
Yeah.
So like, oh, maybe they have reflux disease and maybe they have cancer. Maybe they have this. And like, yes, these are symptoms of the bad things, but they don't usually mean the bad thing. And so, yes, if you're worried, get it checked. But we have to keep that stress in perspective. And I think it's just become way too easy to be stressed. And we also, a lot of parents almost like want to find something. It's like they're so stressed, they like have to do this and stress out about this. And if they don't do that, then they're missing the problem as opposed to missing their child's life and kind of creating that calm and that space for them and that peace. I think we're just so hyper focused on trying to be the best parent, like you said, or the perfect parent, which just doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't exist. And I tried to do that my first few years parenting, and I almost drove myself absolutely insane. Like I was going to wear my baby and have, organic baby food and never put them down and co-sleep and like, attachment. I almost killed myself doing that because I was trying to be this perfect parent that didn't exist at all. And so I think we got to let that go. We really do. But I think maybe some of us, you're younger than me, but some of us grew up as like latchkey kids or uninvolved parents. And so I think we swung the pendulum way too far the other way. And we became these like helicoptery, like over parenting people because we saw that as what you should have done because maybe our parents were under involved. And so I think some of us like we over parent, to be honest, really do.
No, I agree. I think it is a pendulum, and you see it with discipline, right? We many years ago was like very hardcore strict parenting, and then it did kind of swing back to more like quote unquote gentle parenting, or kind of like it's okay, you can do whatever you want kind of parenting, and then it's somewhere in the middle. Everything is in the middle. You want to be authoritative, you want to be caring, you want to be present,
Yes.
you want to be a part of their life, but you don't want to be too over dominant, but you also don't want to be too permissive and just letting them run and do whatever, because kids do best with some boundaries, but reasonable boundaries. And that goes back to that balance. And that's really the key to almost everything. It's the key to everything in the world, right? It's balance.
Yeah.
Like, we do many things, but we just seem to be moving so far in one direction, which isn't the best direction, especially for health. I mean, we're less healthy than we've ever been. Life expectancy is going down, and 50% of kids have a chronic disease or somewhere around that. Like, that's crazy. Those numbers are crazy.
Yeah. And I think going back to what you said, my parents were always looking. I was looking for something for Esme because she was a very strong-willed, big, fiery kid. She was just a tiny kid, but super fiery. And so I was looking for something to fix her. Like I needed a diagnosis. Like she has to have ADHD, or she has to, have tactile defensiveness disorder. She has to have something because we got to fix her. I got to find out what it is that can fix her, and I got to get her fixed. And what I found out is that she's just a kid. She just had a temperament that was big and harder to parent and wasn't going to have me squash her. And so I think there's part of that too, is that, maybe we're not used to just seeing kid behavior as kid behavior.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I see that a lot in the practice, but I also think that we have set up society in a way that's not very helpful to allowing kids to be kids. I mean, like we kind of started about talking, it's just school is not overly conducive to childhood, especially in the first couple of years. The kids are not necessarily meant to sit in a cubicle for a whole day, and we've really decreased the outside time. We've really decreased the the recess, the playing, the arts and crafts, the other things. And I'm not against learning, obviously, but I think that when you stick a bunch of 4 or 5-year-olds in a room all day and they kind of sit there, that's not necessarily developmentally appropriate, and certainly not going to be the right environment for every kid. And then you create some of those situations where we might call it ADHD, or we might call it whatever it is the diagnosis is, but really they're just a more active kid. And so, yeah, of course there are some kids that can benefit from medications. I'm never against that, but I just think that we're so focused on diagnosis that we're missing the bigger picture here, which is that kids are kids, and maybe the environment or changing the way that we're interacting with them can make a big difference. And we don't need to go to medication. We can just support them as best we can.
Yeah, we see in my work about half the kids that I work with, so half the parents of the kids that I work with have an ADHD diagnosis, almost 50%, which is insane.
Mm-hmm.
But what we notice is that when we really dive into connection and really come in with, empathy and understanding, and having limits with empathy and understanding, and parenting them a little bit differently without, punishing them and rewarding them, and, really diving into that, because that's usually what ADHD professionals will recommend, is a lot of rewards, a lot of punishment. But when we get rid of those, these kids just do better. They feel better. They feel more connected. They feel more grounded. Now, sure, they're not perfect, and they're still wired a certain way, and they're still like maybe going to be jumping off the walls some of the time, but they actually do much better when they just feel better in their environment. And sure, medication helps a bunch of them, but sometimes you don't need it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, for me, especially if we're going to go back to the book, then the reason why I wanted to write this was to get ahead of these things, right? Because we're focused on like, you as a practitioner, you're focused and you see these kids when they're a little older, they're 4 or 5, 6, 10, whenever it is. But ideally, as parents and as a pediatrician and as someone who cares about kids, we want to be thinking about their life and their health early on from day one, even before they're born. And I think that is such a key that we're forgetting about these days. Is just the basics, the things that we can do to really make a difference for these kids and get ahead of these issues before they ever get that diagnosis. Because if you kind of set up their life in that way, if you have that mindset and the mentality, then maybe they're going to be in a little bit more supportive environment, and they're never going to need the medication. Maybe they will, but I think a lot of times we can be mindful of these things and eat a little healthier and get a little bit more exercise and support them nutritionally and whatever it is that we can do. And I think that will make a difference and kind of move things in a better direction than where we're going right now.
Yeah. We think, I mean, my whole family, and then now as I've been doing this work for the last 10 years, we really think Esme probably is in the sense of the diagnosis, probably ADHD, but we never had her diagnosed. We never put her on medication. We never did anything. And she's thrived. Now, she's not easy. She's not an easy kid. She wasn't an easy kid to raise, but she did okay with just, altering the way we came to her and helped her in other ways. And it helped her, just navigate her own personality, I guess, her own temperament. And I think sometimes we don't allow kids to learn how to get some coping mechanisms if we're applying medication too early too, because
right.
she worked through it. She totally worked through it, and her life functions weren't, in peril. So she was eating and had friends, and like all the things were still working. And I was like, well, we're just going to write it out and see what happens. And she made it.
Right. But that to me is the right way to approach it. I mean, it's the perfect way to approach it. Is you look at how they're functioning, right? And you see how they're doing. And if there are very severe impairments, and sure, that may be the time where you need to escalate care, and maybe medication is the right thing at that time because they're not able to function in school or whatever it is. But why, for every diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, autoimmune conditions, whatever condition, why do we want to have a medication every day if we don't need to? That should be the last resort. Sometimes it's needed. That's fine. But we should be doing every other thing possible, from lifestyle modification to working with a great therapist to working on coping mechanisms to see if we can manage it without that. Or even if you do need it, then maybe you can minimize it. Maybe there are other things you can do to support it. Maybe you can come off of it faster if you are on a medication. These are kids. And if you put them on a medicine every day for years, that has side effects. And everything's about balancing pluses and minuses and benefits, risks. And for some kids, the benefits are going to outweigh the risks, and so be it. And that's going to be what they need to function. But that's probably not true of most kids. Most kids, there's so many other things that we can be doing for them first. And yet we're jumping to putting kids on ADHD medications like never before, and all kind of medications like never before. I mean, most adults are on multiple medications at this point. And they have side effects that they're going to affect them in the long term. They're going to affect their kidneys. They're going to affect their liver. They're going to affect their brain. They're still growing.
Yeah.
So, we need to be mindful of these things. And I just don't think we're overly mindful of these things. Unfortunately, these days, it's just a quick fix. And that's not a good solution to a long-term problem, because it really, let's say, for example, if you put your kid on an ADHD medication, you don't solve anything, right? You might improve their symptoms, but if there is some sort of underlying imbalance, you're not fixing that. You're not getting to the root cause of it. So you're just going to need more and more medication to kind of keep them at that same place over the next few years. And again, it's not against medicine. That's great if you need it, but that doesn't solve the problem. It just puts a Band-Aid on it, which can be very helpful in the short term, but you still need to work on those root causes. So that way you can hopefully help them to cope and maybe come off that medication at some point.
But I feel like we put kids on medication so that they will fit into the box.
Correct. Exactly.
And I have one client she's so lovely, and she has this great son, and he's on medication, but it's only because, we needed to get him to school. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it wasn't going to work any other way. And, it works to get him to school. But then you think like, gosh, if school would just modify, then he wouldn't need the medication, and it's like, we're just trying to shove these kids into boxes they may not fit in.
Yeah. And it's hard because to find a school that's going to fit your kid's box, that might not be the easiest thing to do. I mean, they might not exist, or even if it does, it might be outside of where you live, or maybe not within your financial means if it's kind of a school. So it's not easy for most people to do that, especially given the staggering numbers, or just, it doesn't exist, even close. But that's something we have to be mindful of as parents, because if you want something different for your kid, then you have to figure out what you can do for them, because the medical system in general is not going to do it, right? They're not going to be super focused on you and your family. There isn't the time to go through your lifestyle to make those changes. So you have to become the champion for them, and you have to figure out what the best option is for them. And yeah, again, it's not against medication. I think it's like super important to say, like, for some kids, I put kids on medications too. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the goal of putting them on medication is to help them to function, not to give them a medicine for the rest of their life. It's like, okay, let's get you in, and then maybe we can work on coping strategies so that way you don't really need your medicine anymore. That to me is where the goal should be. But it seems like it's like, well, you don't fit in the box, just like you said. So we're going to give you this medicine to put you in the box.
Yeah.
But then, well, what's the rest look like?
Yeah. These sweet, sweet, sweet kids. And they're all so sweet. And it's sad to see some of it, but we do our best to help these little people. Where can people find you, Dr. Warsh?
The best place to find me would be on Instagram at Dr. Joel Gator, or you can find the book, wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you can go to the same title as the website. So parenting@yourchildspace.com. You can get it there. And if you do grab the book through the website, then you can email me. The email's on there, and I'll send you guys, anyone who's listening, first chapter, the introduction chapter, a bonus chapter, and a bunch of discounts.
Oh, yay.
My community, they can get access for free, which a lot of parents naturally minded chit-chatting and asking questions. So all that's included if you email me after getting the book.
Amazing. Wow, that's a great bonus. I hope people take advantage of that. And it's Dr. Joel Gator,
Joel Gator,
not Warsh.
Yeah. Not Warsh. Yeah. So Warsh is my last name, but Gator, my last name is IntelliGator. So people thought it was funny and started calling me Dr. Gator, and it kind of stuck.
Oh, that's so cute. Okay, good. And you have a practice here in Studio City?
Yeah, I'm in Studio City.
Okay, great. So any of those people that are in Los Angeles, they need a pediatrician, and look them up too. Are you taking patients?
Our office is taking patients. I mostly take newborns at this point, but we do take some too, yeah.
That's so cute. Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the Peace and Parenting podcast. It was so nice to get to know you, and maybe we can even do coffee since we're so close.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for all you do for all the families.
Thank you.
When you visit Arizona, time is measured in moments, not minutes. Like the moment your work stress disappears as you kayak through the canyons. Or the moment you discover the life-changing effects of prickly pear chocolate. But nothing beats the moment you see the Grand Canyon for the very first time. Visit a new state of mind. Learn more at hereyouareaz.com.